Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today on the stream, we ask how safe are the Tokyo Olympics from COVID-19? We start our conversation with Richard Pound. He is a senior member of the International Olympic Committee. Richard, it is so good to have you here on the stream. You are going to be in Japan in a couple of weeks' time. What will keep you safe, participants safe, volunteers safe?
Well, I think all of the preparations that everybody has been taking, including the Olympic movement, are designed to make sure that as many people as possible are vaccinated twice. I'll have my second shot, I think, next week. And the medical advice we have is that we can, the bubble that everyone wants to create can be created and maintained. And that will start, when I get on a plane in Montreal, I'll have been tested a couple of times in the days preceding that. When I arrive in Tokyo 13 hours later, I'll get tested again, and I won't be let out of the airport if there's any doubt at all about my being infected. I'll be put on a bus and taken to the IOC hotel, which is one of the bubbles. If I were to be an Olympic athlete on this occasion, which despite my youthful experience, I'm not, I would be taken to the Olympic Village, and that's another bubble. And so we've got a whole bunch of playbooks prepared and in process to make sure that everybody involved knows what should be done, what should not be done, what conduct is safe and what is not. And the advice we have is that there is no additional risk to hosting.
So Richard, we have Dr. Sparrow, who's going to come up in this program talking about some of the protocols that should actually be in place. And she is concerned that best practices are not being adhered to. For instance, why would you put athletes in rooms together during a global pandemic? Wouldn't it be a good idea to have athletes in a single room, one by one by one? So if one of them, unfortunately, gets COVID-19, not all of them get COVID-19. Dr. Sparrow is saying this is not best practice right now.
Well, listen, if you want income tax advice, talk to me. We're getting medical advice in Japan that we think is competent, and the playbooks and that may include more than one person in a room have been put together with all concern for health and safety. So let me just say that we and the Japanese authorities are satisfied with that advice, and that's what we're proceeding with.
All right. Let's see what happens. Professor Itani is also joining us a little bit later in this show. Professor Itani is concerned that public opinion in Japan is beginning to change, but a lot of people do not want the Olympics to be held in Japan right now during a global pandemic. Japanese people will be paying for the Olympics in some form, in some way. Why wouldn't you listen as the IOC to public opinion?
Sorry, what are the questions? Why is the IOC?
If public opinion in Japan is saying we are not comfortable with the Olympics happening this year, your response is what, Richard?
Our response is, look, we're as concerned as anybody about public health and safety, and we're not going to put anybody in incremental danger at all. The advice we have now is that this can all be done the way it's been described. And I, like anyone interested in the Olympic Games, I'm getting more excited as the time gets closer and closer. And I'm sure that excitement is spreading throughout the world with all of the Olympic athletes who've been, on tenterhooks about some of this opinion.
Okay.
And negative opinion is quite often apparent just before the games, and it disappears as soon as you find out that the games are being well organized and are perfectly safe.
All right, so I want to bring out one more point, and this is from George Boykov, political science professor at Pacific University. His point is on video. Richard, have a listen and then respond immediately afterwards, please.
Medical officials in Tokyo and around the world are clamoring for the Tokyo Olympics to be canceled. More than 80% of the population in Japan do not want the Olympics to be staged this summer. Olympic athletes are amazing to behold. There's no question about it. But the Olympics are a wholly optional sporting spectacle, not an essential service to humanity. It's time that we listen to the science. Holding the Tokyo Olympics under pandemic conditions could create a massive, potentially dangerous petri dish. Let's listen to the scientists. It's time to cancel the Tokyo Olympics for the sake of global public health.
I think one of the things we should do is a serious fact check. I don't know what medical experts he's talking about. We are in constant touch with people that we think are competent, and we're getting advice that says it's quite safe to go ahead with these games under these conditions. And that's what we're going to do.
Richard Pound is a senior member of the International Olympic Committee. He did not want to debate on the stream today, but he was kind enough to kick off our conversation. I'm going to bring in another thought here, and this comes from the head of the Advisory Committee on Coronavirus Response in Japan. This happened in Parliament last week in Japan. Have a listen, have a look.
It is not normal to hold the games during a pandemic, but they, the organizers, are trying to do that. If they hold the games, the government and the Olympic Committee will have to bear a heavy responsibility for their sectors, or the general public will not support them.
So now you've heard two very different perspectives. Where do you stand? If you're on YouTube, you can be part of our discussion. Jump into the comment section, be part of today's programme. Let me introduce you to our guests. You can talk to them as well. Dr. Sparrow, Professor Itani, Megan O'Leary, so good to have you. I'm going to get you to introduce yourself in the context of the Olympics. Dr. Sparrow, you go first.
Hi, Femi. Good to be here. I am a critical care physician. I've worked on the front lines of various outbreaks, including COVID, Ebola, polio, and I am a global public health specialist. So I'm here in my capacity as one of the co-authors of the New England Journal paper, where we are supporting the Olympics, but we are supporting the Olympics being informed by the best science.
Professor Itani, good to have you here. Introduce yourself to our international audience.
Hello, I'm Sadoko Itani, speaking from Osaka, Japan. I am a professor of sports, gender, and sexuality studies. I've been looking at the impact of the Olympics on the host cities for the past 10 years. And through that, I've been seeing more and more cases of people who, especially marginalized in the community, being negatively impacted.
Okay.
And this time
All right, thank you. Great introduction. More to come. Hello, Megan. Introduce yourself to our international audience. Go ahead.
Hi, Femi. Megan O'Leary. I'm currently in Princeton, New Jersey, United States. I am a 2016 and 2020 Olympian, scheduled to head to Tokyo in just a few weeks to compete at the Games.
Megan, I am looking at Team USA, the rowing team here. They're looking fine form. Are you freaking out about Tokyo?
You know, I think as athletes, we at this point sort of put the blinders on, right? There's a lot of support staff around us that are, meant to try and take on all of the noise around us. But I have concerns. I was in Rio. Obviously, we all remember a lot of the conversation as we headed into the Rio Games about, the water quality of I'm a rower. I was on that body of water. And so, it's not foreign to me in terms of this conversation as we head into the Games, but this is something different. This is definitely something different this time.
You heard the most senior member of the IOC just at the top of our programme. Was he reassuring for you as an athlete?
Yes and no. I think that's coming from a place of I have to put trust in my NGB, U.S. rowing. I have to put trust in my support staff, and that funnels up to the support in the IOC. Yeah. But I do think it's the responsibility of the athletes. We are the reason that the Games exist, to continue to apply the appropriate pressure to, the powers that be, in this case, the IOC, to make sure that the Games are safe for all and equitable for all in terms of the experience we're having. And so, I want to continue to apply that pressure in the best way I can, because it needs to be safe if, we've decided to host the game or hold the Games and go forward.
Dr. Sparrow, I feel like I'm seeing your cynical space. looking down through your glasses, I am not sure that you were convinced by Richard Pound. And I'm also looking here on my laptop at the Playbook Athletes and Officials, your guide to safe and successful games. You've had a look at this. What should athletes be concerned about?
Well, first of all, I think that we either have a different definition of what a bubble is. Dick Pound's, definition of a bubble looks to me more like a tent, where, these are not bubbles. These are, really open spaces where a lot of people are coming and going, and they are simply not informed by the best practice. For example, the village is ventilated with pre-COVID ventilation. That means it's got, designed as 2 air changes per hour. The minimum that we would think necessary is 5 air changes per hour, if not 9. Now, athletes are expected to spend a lot of time in their hotels in the village, particularly because they're not allowed now to go outside to mix, to mingle, to socialise. Now, what that means is that they're going to be spending a lot more time in the hotel, and not in their own rooms necessarily, but in each other's rooms too. And, instead of actually doing the obvious, and of course it's far too late now to retrofit, ventilation everywhere, and the same applies to indoor venues, which is very different from outdoor venues. So if you're a rower like Megan, well, to some extent she's protected in her field of play because she's out in the open rowing. If you're a wrestler, that's about as intimate as intercourse. And, any sport that is inside, so the gymnasts, for example, are even though that they are not necessarily in direct proximity with their competition, they're still at risk because it's an indoor venue. So one of the obvious fixes, for example, is simply to put in HEPA filters, high efficiency particle air filters, which can clean the air. We need to stop this charade of cleaning the surfaces, which we know has nothing to do with getting rid of COVID, and stop focusing on washing our hands and start focusing on cleaning the air and testing athletes every single day and frankly everyone else as well. And that's how we're going to make it a safe Olympics.
Professor Itani, we have to remember, though, that all of these thousands of athletes are coming to Japan, but also that means that they're a threat, potentially, to the Japanese population as well. Not just, are we worried about, the athletes are going to make it? They're pretty fit, most of them. I want to also talk about the Paralympics, but let's just talk about the influx of people coming into Japan. Are you feeling comfortable about that in a month's time, just over a month's time?
So first of all, I am not a medical expert, so I've been trying to listen to what the scientists are saying, doctors and nurses and advisors to the government. And I've been hearing only concerns, basically. And based on that, I don't feel like the safety is assured. And when we talk, the people who say it's going to be safe, they only focus on the athletes. I have a tremendous respect to athletes, and I'm sure they will follow the rules. However, there are other tens of thousands of people flying into Japan and who are going to make sure that they are following the rules. And also another aspect that's not discussed is that there are, again, hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, coming to Tokyo within Japan. And these people will not be monitored, not vaccinated, and not to mention being tested. And we are currently in the fourth wave of infection, and we are in the third state of emergency. It's just because we had some increase of flow of people in March when the state of emergency was lifted. So all these things indicate that if you only focus on the movement of the athletes, we are forgetting about the other huge risks that we are facing.
I had a look through your Twitter feed, Professor Itani. This is what I found. We are planning to have a No Olympics action. And this idea that I have a feeling that if you could cancel the Olympics, you would.
Absolutely. This is not just about the risks of health risks, but the attitudes that we have seen from the IOC and the government is enough to call for the cancellation, because we have been voicing the opinion, and we are, as a taxpayers, we are putting a lot of resources into this, but we aren't heard, we aren't respected. And the IOC sells itself as the movement of peace and friendship, or the corporation, but we are only basically being ignored, and people feel increasingly frustrated. And the fact that our democratic will have been ignored is enough sign that this game must not go on.
But Megan, what would you say to Professor Atani, because you train so hard, so long, you are fortunate in that this is not your only Olympics that you will be attending, but sometimes it's the only chance in your entire career. What would you say to Professor Atani about that?
You know, I mean, it's hard to argue with Professor Atani on this, to be honest. I mean, you know, as an athlete, you're so focused on the goal, and the goal is, you know, for this instance, it's to go to the Olympics, but you never want that to be at the expense of someone else, especially when it comes to health. You know, I've been fortunate to go to an Olympic Games. I made the decision last year to continue on, thinking that when and if we decided to have the games, it would mean that the world was able to come together around the games. And it's really difficult to, I'm excited, but it's really difficult to be excited because that's not the case. You know, we're holistically not ready. We're not having international fans, right? I think there has been acknowledgement that this is not beaten yet, being COVID. And so, you know, it's hard to argue with that at all in terms of, you know, the science is supporting it. And, you know, you see it in the press that the Japanese population, the majority, it's up to 80%, I think, right now, are calling for, you know, they don't want the games right now. And understandably, and I know, you know, Richard Pound mentioned it, that there's always negative sentiment leading up to the games for some reasons or another, but this is different. I understand that, absolutely.
So I'm looking here, Dr. Sparrow, at a headline from the Times of India. New poll finds half of Japanese back Olympics this summer. So the numbers who are appreciating that the Olympics are coming to their country going up a little bit by little bit. I am just thinking about what could possibly be the worst case scenario if you have a number of different variants coming into Japan over a short period of time. What could happen?
What could happen, and what almost certainly will happen if it proceeds as under the current measures informed by the IOC, it's where we'll see an Olympic of the variants. And that means, you know, we already see that the Delta variant marching across the UK, and we see that being vaccinated isn't necessarily protection, whether that is vaccine escape or whether it's because, I mean, the virus is like software, right? It constantly innovates. So, you know, we made our vaccines for version 1.0 of the virus, and now we're up to all these different variants, which are basically, you know, 2.0, 3.0, wherever we're at. Now, you know, the athletes, yes, are young and fit and healthy. They're also the most likely people to carry variants back. So just as athletes come into the village, into the venues, and so will their support staff, so will the public, so will the media, so will the journalists, then that's where the variants can mix and mutate and mix and match themselves, you know, have virus progeny, have mutant progeny, and take them back, you know, to 205 countries. Now, not all countries have heavy caseloads, not all countries have variants, but what we can certainly see or expect to see is the global impact. I expect that we'll probably scrape through the Olympics, you know, with, you know, there are so many different sporting events. What
about the Paralympics?
Yes,
Dr.
some of them
Sparrow?
might get cancelled.
What about the the Paralympics? Because we're talking about
that is
incredibly fit athletes, but also athletes who have other challenges, which could be a whole spectrum of different challenges. So their health may be at a different level from athletes who had been taken part in competition 2 weeks earlier or a few weeks earlier.
Absolutely. So those are the two issues. First of all, we're going to see this huge spike, right? No matter what, we can expect to see a spike. You know, picture the spike, the global spike after Christmas, or the US spike after Thanksgiving. And the Paralympics are going to be right bang smack in the middle of that, because we see that spike start 2 weeks after, and then the Paralympics are another 2 weeks after that. And the Paralympics are more diverse. You know, they're differently abled, they're less functional, they have a diverse range of immune competence, and they're just simply not as able to cope with the virus the same way that Olympic athletes can. Sure. So that in itself is that they are particularly vulnerable, and that's where we need to see some flexibility so that can still go ahead, you know, at a different time, and athletes aren't compromised and the Japanese government isn't held over a barrel the way that the IOC basically has over a barrel right now.
Okay. Professor Itani, I want to play this to you. This is Paul O'Shea. He is thinking about, he's an academic, he is thinking about the Liberal Democratic Party and maybe where they stand in terms of the Olympics definitely happening or not happening. Have a listen to Paul and then respond to him.
I don't think public opinion matters that much in the decision to go ahead with the Games this summer. There is an election in autumn, but the opposition is pretty weak and divided, and due to the nature of the Japanese political system, actually, the LDP only needs about 25% of the vote to stay in power. The IOC, for its part, is dead set on the Games going ahead, so for Tokyo to cancel them unilaterally would become very expensive and very messy, and it would probably cost Prime Minister Suga his job. So from the government's perspective, actually, it makes sense to defy public opinion and to push ahead of the Games, at least under the current conditions.
Just as you heard, the LDP, our ruling party, is notorious for not listening to people. And that is even more the reason why people are worried about this Olympics. No matter how much the LDP or our government said it can be safe, we don't trust it. The past year and a half, they failed to contain. They failed to provide enough number of testing. And in this condition, they have a tremendous financial interest and also the interest in national pride in hosting the Olympics. So these people these are the people representing Japan, and people are not happy about this. And also, I want to jump onto the popular opinion about half of the people supporting. But I have to point out that the poll has a flaw because it does not have did not have the choice of postponement. If you add the option, about 80% of people don't want the Olympics this summer. And then the polling was done by the Yomiuri Shimbun, which is one of the sponsors. So we see all these ways of making it look like people are supporting and it's going to be safe, but it is definitely not the representation of what we are feeling here.
Let me do an unscientific poll on YouTube here. Hello, viewers. Thank you very much for watching on YouTube. I don't think mass gathering is safe, no matter how careful the organisers are. SPL Puro One still recommends postponing. Well, Japan says we're either doing it this year or we're not doing it. So there's no option. It's either happening or it's not happening. Seems like it's happening. And they are particularly worried about this new variant and new cases. Megan, I feel like we've given you the worst afternoon ever right now. You're frowning so deeply. This is not good for your training and not good for your mental process. But what are athletes like yourself talking to each other about? If I could be on a fly on the wall at the USA rowing team, what would you be talking about? Would you be like, ah? Or do you just hands over your ears and try not to think about it?
Unfortunately, I think it's the latter. Although, even as early as, just this morning after practice, we are bubbled as a team and we've all vaccinated, but we're starting, as we start to plan our departure and heading to a pre-camp before entering into Tokyo, really making sure that we're all doing what we need to do to, make sure we're, the habits of wearing a mask and making sure that we're following all the rules that we are capable of to protect each other. But also, I think Professor Itani and, Dr. Sparrow mentioned there are so many people coming into the country and we are reliant on everyone behaving positively in terms of following the rules. That's also a big margin of error.
And Olympics is a party. It's about human endeavour and athleticism, but it's also an amazing party for either people who are spectating or people who are joining in. And also some of the athletes are young, and I'm not sure how well they're going to be behaving. All right, good luck. Stay safe, Megan. Are you sharing a room with anybody?
They haven't told us quite yet. They haven't told us our living situation. The first time I heard about that we would likely be rooming with another athlete, I see Dr. Sparrow nodding. Yeah. We've been given little information, right? So, we don't know what we're headed into.
Yikes. All right, we're going to connect you with Dr. Sparrow, Megan. So you and the USA rowing team, you've got good advice. Let me show you here. Thank you, guests, so much. Let me show you here how you can follow Megan's journey. You can follow her on Twitter. Also, keep up with Professor Itani and also Dr. Annie Sparrow for the latest there on what they're thinking about the upcoming Tokyo Olympics. I think it's upcoming. I think it's definitely happening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on the stream. Take care, everybody.